Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater.
All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. I'm Lyndsay, and today I'm here with Ed and special guest, our producer, Josh.
What's up?
Okay.
Hey, if you're doing this to me, I'm doing it right back to you.
I am not Lyndsay. I am
look at
producer
that.
Josh. And this is Lyndsay, and that's Ed.
Wow, Josh just introduced himself. But
I did. Sorry.
Yeah. You are, if you're listening, you are hearing the voice of Josh Eckman, who is our producer for this podcast. We've gotten a lot of comments. I mean, we're like 72 episodes into Beyond the Breakwater, and we have gotten a lot of feedback about like the quality of this, both audio, and then if you're watching on YouTube, you can see Josh. But you can just see the quality, and this is the guy behind it all. So, welcome on our podcast today, Josh.
You guys ran out of guests. That's what
we
you're
were
telling
desperate.
me.
We're
Scraping the bottom of the barrel here,
You
Josh.
had
Yeah.
to bring in the producer.
We were like, you don't even have to record this one. Just please,
Yeah.
help us out.
Yes, I'm happy to be here. It'll be a fun conversation. What are we
Yeah.
talking about?
Nice.
Transition.
Yeah.
I'm in the driver's seat now.
So we are talking about, is the unchurched really welcome in the church? Like, does the church welcome that? Are they excited by it? We wanted Josh on today because Josh has a lot of really great thoughts and really great questions. And I feel like we naturally have these conversations anyways. And we've been trying, I feel like since starting this, of like, Josh, can you just like put a mic in the producer room and be a voice on the podcast? Because it's like every time beyond recording, we have all of these really great follow-up conversations. So I think you will be a really great voice in this conversation today. So the reason we're talking about it and what kind of prompted this is we've mentioned that we have groups come up once a month, typically, to come for a Beyond the Breakwater workshop. We host them. We kind of give the whole education piece of what we've been talking about on the podcast so far, and just how to serve your community as the church and build bridges back into the community. We tour all of the ministries. But another like topic that comes up a lot is this concept of like, is there space for the unchurched in your building? Like, do they feel welcomed? Does the church have an eye out? Like, are they really okay with people coming in your church with messy lives? And we talk about this in the presentation. We go through and look at pictures we went to South Haven and took the boat out, and we just run in this analogy of Beyond the Breakwater of we're in the harbor and you see boats that are docked and raised up out of the water. They are clean. They look like they've never been touched by the water. And within the analogy, it's like, I'm sure most people have been on a boat at some point. And there are people that it's like, there's this guy that I know, he owns a boat and he worked on it all summer long. And it's like, all right, he finally was like, let's take this boat out finally. And it's like, you go to step on it from the water and he's like, could you wipe your feet off before stepping in? And it's like, okay, so you don't want me to eat, drink, like make this boat messy at all. Like, this is your pride and joy. And it's like, okay, now compare it to the church. Like, do we really want people walking in the church? Or are we going to have that same approach of like, before you come in, could you clean up a little bit? Could you put your Sunday best on? Like, I'm going to ask you how you're doing, but I really hope you don't go into the deep darks of your mind and situation. Like, are we ready to receive those people? You look like you have a thought, Josh.
Well, I mean, I just think that the short answer is no. I think we don't a lot. I think church is comfortable. Church is for us. We need it for our routines. We need it to be good Christians. We check off our boxes. And we say that we want growth. We want to reach the unchurched. But I don't know. That's different when they actually show up, and maybe they have a smell. Maybe they aren't the prettiest people in the world. Maybe they have baggage that they're bringing. That's harder to work through. That's not
Yeah.
an easy solution. That's getting messy. And yeah, that's hard. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's a good topic. I'm excited to talk about it.
We kind of talked before this of keeping things conceptual, but I'll share like a good experience or maybe just something that you guys can comment on, because there was a church that I had attended that was kind of in the heart of a like lower income area, and it was like on a Sunday morning, it looked like my eyes were just opened to this, like, holy smokes, like this church is filled with a lot of like messy people. Like there was a lot of homeless people in this church, and it was like a mixture of really, really well-dressed people, and then right in the chair next to them was someone that you could very visibly tell like was without a home, has been on the streets, and then like a nice person, and then like every other person. It was just like a really big mixing pool of people. And after the church service, I had went, because I know that they have like a homeless ministry, so I went and talked to the person who was leading this homeless ministry, and her and I were talking for probably like 30 minutes, and our conversation, if it was alone in a room, probably only would have lasted 5 minutes. But the reason it was so drawn out is because so many people kept coming up to her and like interjecting in our conversation, of like someone who wanted to like go back to this like abusive boyfriend because he was giving her a place to stay for the night. And the person I was talking to was like, nope, you have to promise me you're going to like not go back to him just for tonight. Like promise me one more night you're not going to do this. Another person coming up needing food. Like our conversation was constantly being interjected by people that she had been ministering to over the course of time at this homeless ministry. And it's like, you can look at that and be like, I'm just so frustrated. Like I just wanted to like connect with this person. But like, are you okay if that's the interaction that you're having at a church, where it's like you might not be able to connect with a friend or connect with, someone that you've been wanting to meet for a long time or something? Like, are you okay with the dynamic of your church shifting if it means you have to sacrifice something?
I think this is more practical than we realize. I mean, I'm going back as I'm listening. When I began in ministry, I actually had two possible churches I could serve. One was inner city Chicago, and so I actually went to visit it. And I think I was really surprised because I had come out of 2 years in Guatemala, so my Spanish was very fluent. And when I drove down there to this church in Chicago, inner city Chicago, I noticed that the whole community was Hispanic, and I was like, this is awesome. I mean, this is really amazing. I remember going to the church service on Sunday morning, and it was all Anglo, and the whole community was Hispanic. And I think this is not an unusual thing for churches. Like they're in a community, maybe an Anglo community, an Anglo church, and then the community changes and the church moves out. The people move further and further away from the church, but they keep traveling in because that's, quote, their church. Mm-hmm. And I think churches really struggle with this a lot, especially inner city churches, that community's changing, but the church is not changing with the community, and they no longer reflect their community. And I think that's a really good question for churches today. Are they reflecting the communities that they serve in?
I think one thing, maybe one question, I like to ask questions, so there's going to be a lot of questions. And these are not questions that maybe have the best answers, but they're just questions to consider and think about and struggle with. Is, a big word that a lot of churches really like to use and dictates a lot of what they do is tradition. Churches have traditions that they do, and that's a part of their identity. And the trendy thing to do is to just say, throw out all tradition. Tradition is bad. Like you got to keep up with the times and things like that. What do you think the balance is between a church keeping its traditions and not, or trying new things? Or is there value in a church, like you were talking about, keeping some of its foundational elements, whether that's parts of the service or whatever it might be. Is there any value in tradition? And if so, how do you balance that with keeping up and changing? And
Do you think that that question plays a role in how like the community is reflected in your church?
say that again.
Like, do you think that that is a factor that is prohibiting churches from actually reflecting who is in their community, whether or not they
Keeping up with
balance
traditions?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and this is just maybe the signs of aging churches, because I think churches are aging. You have young churches that are exploding as fast as any, and then you have churches that are aging, and we've talked about, or you guys have talked about. I feel like I've been a part of it because I've listened to every single episode.
Painstaking minute of.
I've listened to all the things that have been cut that you guys have never heard. And my oh my, is there? No, I'm just kidding.
There's a few bloopers.
There's a few
We actually record for an hour long, but only 30 minutes is worth something.
No, it is. It is.
Just
Yes, we have to come through with a weed whacker and get rid of all Lyndsay's mistakes.
Classic.
We've talked about
Finish your thought, like a young church.
How the older churches are maybe, mathematically deteriorating, and after some point they're just going to cease to exist. To them, I would imagine tradition is very important. Maybe. I'm not going to say definitely, but probably tradition is pretty important to them. But then for younger churches, a lot of people are scared to get rid of tradition, and when they do, other people might look at those churches and say, well, you're not built on anything. Like you don't have a solid foundation. It's really easy to go off track. A lot of people say that about non-denominational churches. How do you not have a denomination? Those are really important to keeping you sound and, on the right path. And yeah, I don't know. I can see value in both. I think it is good to have some form of structure, maybe tradition. I mean, there's tradition built into that, but I don't know, that becomes hard when that is keeping you from reaching new believers, or when you put that so highly that newcomers coming in, they're not going to know your traditions.
Right.
They don't understand any of that.
I've got a couple thoughts on this. Maybe just we could chat about, or just get your reaction to it. I think I've watched over the years that if you, I know there's an expression, what got you here won't keep you here. Churches, however they start, whatever target audience they're going after, they may get that group of people, like you say, maybe young people, or you're going after young people. And so this is an amazing church for young people. Well, young people start to get a little older. Do they stay with the people that are there, or do they stay with their concept of we're going to keep going after the younger generation?
Right.
Because when you decide who you're going to go after, I wish I had a good analogy, but it's almost like every time you move to the right, you lose somebody on the left. And I don't mean politically right and left. I just mean if you're going to take a step from, mathematically from 50 to 55, you're going to lose 5 and below. Then you go 55 to 60, you lose 10 and below. So I've noticed over the years that if we want to shift in order to attract or to reach another segment of the population, we're always going to lose people, always. And I think the hardest thing from my perspective is sometimes you have to choose who you're going to listen to, and you have to choose who you're going to retain. I know that sounds really bad, but we've made decisions along the way. I can even tell you at, where I'm serving now, we've made decisions along the way that sometimes people who have money have sat down with me and said, if you follow through with that decision, money's walking out the door. And I'm not making that up. In fact, I had one person say, the church is going to lose a lot of money if I walk out this door. But I had to make a decision on, are we going to do what we think God is calling us to do, and lose somebody who has wealth in order to do what we think God's calling us to do? So every decision that the church makes, you're always going to make a decision on the who. Always. If you're going to be a contemporary church, that's awesome. But as soon as you go modern contemporary, you lose people that came 10 years ago for the contemporary of 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is what's hard for churches. Like, do we really want new people? Because it's going to come at a cost.
I don't
what we're
even
giving
know if people are focusing on the who. I think they're focusing on the what more than the who. And it just so happens that the who is kind of secondary, and the who is people who already exist within the church. And what I mean by that is, like, I've recalled times where people have come up for workshops or just wanting to, like, see the space or how we do things. And we'll walk around, and it's like there's this very obvious draw for us, or this desire to join God on mission in our community, obviously, like if you've been listening to this podcast at all. But then it's like, after hearing all of that, it's like there might be a question of, like, okay, are you doing these elements in your church service on Sunday mornings? And it's always like traditional stuff that's even like beyond like my comprehension of the exposure to like this church body of like the sacraments and the different, like, I don't know, I don't even know what to call them,
Traditions.
but yeah, just traditions. And so it's like their focus after hearing all of that is like our mission statement of reaching one more life with Jesus by creating environments for life transformation. Like, that's our mission statement and strategy for what we do. And after hearing the who of who we're going after, as Jesus would, seeking and saving the lost, their question is still focused on the what. Like, are you upholding these traditions still?
I think the who is always affected, though.
Yeah.
Which is why when we go back to, I mean, let's keep overlaying this with the model, Beyond the Breakwater. When the ship or the boat or whatever we're going to use, the ministry goes beyond the breakwater, and people respond to it and come to church, you always sometimes have a challenge on, yikes, are they going to become more like us, or are we going to be open, welcome, shift, move over? Of course, there's a space for them. I think churches, I've come to see over the years, they have a range. Every church has a range. I know as a pastor, when you come to a church, like I always ask a couple of data points, like tell me where you were 5 years ago in ministry, not numbers, in ministry, and tell me where you are today. And if you tell me where you were and where you are, I can tell you where you're going. If they're the same place 5 years ago that they are today, then I know that there really is no desire to go anywhere different. They want to be the same. Mm-hmm. And so what's the range of change? It's like a ship, if you go true north, I think churches are only capable of, well, let's use a clock. It's easier for everybody to understand. Maybe 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock if they're going north. That's the range. You're never going to take a church and go 6 o'clock because that's way too much change. You're going to disrupt everything, and you're going to wind up actually breaking the church and losing the church because they can't stretch that far. Even time, the greater the change, the longer it takes to make that change. But I think you can never underestimate there's only a certain amount of change that a group of people are capable of.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like we're talking about like a lot of bigger concept things, but kind of, I think I want to boil it down to like individuals within a church. Like, Do you think that individuals are receptive to new people in their church or the unchurched? Because that's kind of what we're not just talking about new believers coming into your church building, but unbelievers. Do you think that people are excited or want that, and do their actions reflect it?
I would say that people would say that they are, mm-hmm. and they might be, but I honestly think that maybe people don't have enough experience to really know. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people, when a new family, say you're a small church, 100 people, and a new family shows up on a Sunday, everyone's minds on that Sunday are, we got a new family. Mm-hmm. Like there's kind of like a feeling of we're checking off a box, we're doing it, it's working. Mm-hmm. If they're believers, that still kind of feels that way. If they're unbelievers, great, but I think that happens pretty rarely. Mm-hmm. I don't think it happens as much as people think that it will, just because I mean, and now we're getting to like, does the attractional church model work, and what is your what is your arm reaching out into the community to find unbelievers? And some churches don't really have any way to really do it. They're just kind of hoping that people come. So I think a lot of people would say, yes, we want unchristian people to walk in these doors, unbelievers, and we want that, and we just want to love them. Do they know how to do that when it happens? I don't know. I don't think enough people have enough practice, probably.
I would put the people that are attending on a scale. So just, I know in concept, but I think I've watched, like, let's say when a person comes into the church, you have people on, let's just, if we use a number in the 80s or 90s for whatever judgment we're using, who would be like wired to go to that person and make them feel really welcome. But I think you have a range of people that are maybe in the 60s, 50s that are like, oh, there's a new person, no, I don't want to talk to them. Yeah. And then you have people on the lower end that are just like, wow, they're dressed differently, or they're talking differently, or they look differently. I don't want anything to do with them. So I don't think we can say as a whole.
Sure.
I bet you, I would just guess, no church has more than 10%, maybe 15% of a church that's really missional in heart, that could embrace somebody regardless of their walk of life, regardless of how they walk in, regardless of language, lifestyle, whoever they are, that would be totally embracing that person. And others might take time. I mean, it's like early adopters, and then some are late. Some will never change. Some will never accept because they're so different. So I don't think we can use a generality there. I think you've got only maybe 10% of people that are on the lookout missionally. Like, you come in and, doesn't matter how you look, doesn't matter, you said before, how you smell, doesn't matter. They're going to embrace you and say, I'm so glad you're here, I'll sit with you. Come sit with me.
Yeah. And it's like, so part of this conversation was sparked because I'd listened to a podcast that was talking about this for like, it was like a brief part in their discussion. And they had said, like, until you have somebody that absolutely like breaks your heart that they don't know Christ, like it won't change how you serve. It won't change how you do mission, how you interact in the church, how you welcome new people, until you have that person or have had that experience in your life. Kind of similar to like if you've ever invited somebody to church and it's like whether they've been in a church and this is their like first time at your church, or maybe they have never been in a church and this is their first time, period. It's like you meet that person at the door and all of a sudden your attention is like hyper focused on like, okay, did they feel welcome? Did they feel like other people said hi to them? How do they feel about the worship right now? Did they feel really weird about that greeting time? How did they feel about like how it ended? What did they think of the sermon? Oh my gosh, the pastor just said this and it like really pertains to their life and I'm super uncomfortable. Like, you're running through all of these things in your head. But I think without having that person in mind, you become very like, kind of like on autopilot of like, I'm just going to do my typical Sunday routine. And it takes a lot of like thought to, I think, enter into a Sunday morning, keeping your eyes out for people who are alone or are just trying to make a mad dash, like in and out, or like just looking for that person who might not feel comfortable to look outside of just your Sunday experience.
So interesting, Lyndsay, you're talking about this, and I'd love your response to this as well, Josh. We've got some people that come to the church that I know are not believers. Their wife, there are two guys in particular I'm thinking about. Their wife has said, I really want you to come to the church and do that with us, and they are coming. But when I see them, which is quite regularly, it changes me every message. And I'm so glad they're there because I'm like, how do I help woo this person into a relationship with Christ? And then I'm always reminded, okay, I know they're not the only one. I know that there's others, but I love being able to go, I'm so glad this person's here. I'm going to speak differently. I'm going to speak into their life. And really what it does for me is say to the believers, like, I'm not going to speak into your life as much as I'm really going to go after that person's life because they don't know Christ. You know Christ. You're going to heaven. They don't know Christ yet. I mean, when you had some friends come from young adult a couple weeks back, that really impacted me, like be conscious of every word. How are they receiving it? How are they perceiving it? I don't know if they're believers, not believers. So it does as I don't know, leader. So it does. It really impacts me. I'm looking at the new people that I don't know and wondering where they are with the Lord. I don't know. You want to just comment on that, Josh?
Well, one thing I really like about one of the bigger churches, Pastor Craig Groeschel, he's just such a good leader. Every time he finishes a message, he invites anyone who doesn't know Jesus, invites them to get to know Jesus, commit their life to him every single time. And that's very powerful because, like, do you think all the Christians in the crowd, which at the end he says, with every head bowed, every eye closed, I see that hand, that classic call and response. You're getting 3 hands, 5 hands in a room of 1,000 people. Do you think the other 1,000 believers, do you think that is detrimental to their faith, or do you think they find that annoying, or do you think that feels too basic to them? Like, no. Like, that feels like we are going after progress. We want people, new believers, every week. And by him doing that as an example, I feel like that is great, like, direction setting and vision setting for the church. This is our goal. If you don't know Jesus, this is who Jesus is, and this is how you can, become a Christian and live your life for him. And if you do that, welcome to the family, celebrate with everyone else who has done that. And now you're part of the family, and now we're going to keep building you up. Like, that's the beginning of their journey every single week. I think that's very cool. So that's something that not a lot of pastors will save that for, once every few months. We might do an altar call, is what they used to call it. And that kind of thing. And that's kind of an old fashioned model at this point for some, but if that is your mentality of every message, I want it to lead to Christ and I want it to lead to the gospel, that is a great way on stage from a leadership perspective, I think, to kind of go in that direction of like, this is for you.
This matters.
Yes, exactly. And this, like, yes, you can preach good messages for people that know Jesus, and that's important. That is very important. And if that's all you want to do, fine, but just know that you're not a church for unchurched people at that point. No one that doesn't know anything about, the gospel is going to hear a message on, I don't know, Leviticus and just be so inspired and make all the next steps on their own. Like, you have to help them. You have to guide them. You have to shepherd them and disciple them. That's the whole point. So yeah, that's a really cool model that I like.
So why do you think more pastors don't do that?
It's a great question. Yeah. I don't know. I think in their minds, they kind of come to the realization that they are preaching to Christians. Like, whether they want to believe it or not, rather than saying, I want to lead someone in the gospel and show them what the gospel is for the first time every Sunday, they're saying, I have to come up with something theologically new and cool and different that will impact these people that have been listening to me for 30 years. And I have to do that in a new and fresh way. Otherwise, they're going to get less Christian. Like, the thinking kind of breaks down because that's not how that works,
Lyndsay, would you consider that harbor ministry?
Like altar calls?
No.
Or what? Oh, just preaching to, preaching to the saved. I like, as you were sharing like that vision piece, I'm like, man, I kind of like forgot that there could potentially be unbelievers in a church.
Right.
Like, it's like you have this assumption that like every single person here is saved. And I think a question that's been rattling around in my mind the past 10 minutes is like, okay, what is the purpose of the church? Like, what is the church? Like, the church is an assembly of believers, right? Like, but then it's like, then you talk about, okay, the purpose of the church is different. And like, God uses the church to love the world as believers to love the world and reach the world. And so I think we also have to define like the importance that we're placing on Sunday mornings. And it's still something very important, but I think I don't want people to listen to this podcast and assume that Sunday mornings are going to be the thing that your church does as its only missional thing.
Yeah.
I don't think Sunday mornings are a missional thing. Like, I think Sunday mornings are a body of believers gathering together for worship and like equipping and sending out, right?
That's missional to me.
And so I think
Yeah.
it is, yes, it has a missional response from a Sunday morning.
Yes.
But I don't think we can look at a Sunday morning and be like, okay, churches now like really focus on how you receive new people, because if you can receive new people well, then more new people will come who are unbelievers, and that's going to be your main mission field. I think the assumption is your church is doing something missional outside of Sunday mornings, and are you ready to receive people who don't know Christ from everything that you've done throughout the week?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, go back to the model. It's like you're in the harbor, you're getting your boat ready. They're cleaning the boat, gassing it up, whatever, making sure that it's ready to go. And they see someone out just beyond, just outside the breakwaters. And some churches are gonna, Sunday morning is them prepping, right? They're getting things ready. Sunday morning ends. What do they do then? What do they do with the boat? There's people out there regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Do you take the boat out all week and find people? Or do you sit in your boat and yell, hey, we're over here.
Mm-hmm.
We will save you. Come on over.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you, maybe some churches will even take, those life preservers and they'll throw it as far as they can towards the people and say, hey, it's right there. You just have to get there and then you're good. Some churches won't try anything. They'll just turn their backs and, hang out on their boats and not even notice the people. But I think it's kind of stages. Like, what is your church doing? Are you not noticing people at all? Are you seeing people and hoping that they come to your boat? Are you seeing people and making an effort maybe to get people in, but you're not, committing and going and getting them? Or are you deciding like they need to be lifted out of the water? Like they can't swim on their own, right? They need help. And that is what the gospel is, and that is what the church is. And do you go after them? And if you go after them, well, then practically, that's probably not a Sunday morning thing. I mean, it might be, but I haven't seen that working that well.
Mm-hmm.
No, I haven't either. I think the church on Sunday, at least from my perspective, is equipping. I mean, I know I personally, I try to, in a couple simple ways. Like when we meet and greet and I'm hosting, I'll say, please make sure every person who's here today feels very welcome. That means don't just go to your friends. Travel, go everywhere. Make sure not one person is in this room that says, nobody ever said hi to me. So how do we do that? Which is always accounting for the person who may be there for the first time. Minimally, you want them to feel like I was made to feel really welcome here. That's awesome. I think it's just a part of who I am that I'm always sending them missionally. Like, it starts when you leave here. It starts in a parking lot. I mean, it starts because imagine somebody coming to church who's not a believer and goes outside and you're aggressive or you're not very nice in a parking lot, trying to get in or get out. What have you just done to that person?
Yeah.
Or why do we've talked about this. Why do so many waitresses and waiters hate Sundays? Because here's the believers and all they're doing is complaining about what happened in church. And they don't like the conversation. They don't like it. So the church has to really take this to heart and become missional and say, go be Jesus. Mm-hmm. Go ask the waitress. Go ask the waiter. What can you pray for? Mm-hmm. How can you encourage them? Tip them well. Care for them. It's not difficult, but for some reason churches really struggle, and I think because they lose the missional component.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe an added piece is they might not know the how. like you say, it's easy. And for some people that's very challenging, and it can be simple. It doesn't have to be super complex. Like you said, speaking to someone nicely in the world outside of the church. I mean, that can do more than you think. But I think people struggle with that sometimes. Like, what do we do? What do we say? I don't want to go preach the gospel to someone in the grocery store. And I would say, don't do that. It's not,
unless they ask you.
they ask you, and if they do, great. I mean, you're there for a reason, but yeah, I think we get that messed up sometimes too, but
Yeah, well, I think we've talked a little bit about this. Show them, don't tell them.
yeah, yeah,
Until they ask. And then the scriptures tell us always be ready
be ready
to give it a word, to share the hope that we have
yeah.
in Christ when asked.
And then
about
that
it.
goes back to also being ready is after you tell them, you might not be done. That's when discipleship starts.
Yeah.
And that's even harder.
Yeah, you're right.
And that's another part of what the church is called to do is, okay, now that you got someone, which it didn't happen on Sunday morning, it happened, elsewhere. Now that's a great time after all of that has happened to say, hey, I know a place where you can keep going. And I think our church would really love to help you along this journey. We have people that will walk beside you and help you through this. That is where the church can be really impactful for people. And because now you just gave them a sponge and they're cleaning the boat, getting it ready to go back out, right? Or whatever. I'm not a nautical man, so I don't know I don't know the boat prep, but you're giving them something. You're scraping the barnacles off of the
And I
port side.
I don't think people, I don't think we know how to do that well. We haven't known how to have a sustained relationship with someone that has a messy life because of, I think, the model of the church and the model of how we share the gospel being evangelism and street evangelism is it's like it dismisses you from all responsibility to like walk life with someone and like really get down in the trenches with what's going on in their life when all you're doing is going in rapid fire sharing the gospel with as many people as possible. You pat yourself on the back of like, oh my gosh, I did something that was so bold and scary.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, this person is living a completely like wrecked life and
It's for you, not for them.
yeah. And so it's like, how do you like, and maybe that's the question and that's the tension in this whole podcast today is like, are you ready for like not only your church to be messied by those who are like, I mean, we all, Christians and unbelievers, like we all have very messy lives, but are you ready to receive people and like really be in the trenches with them for a sustained period of time? Not just a quick, hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Awesome. Okay. Have a good Sunday. But like really be in life.
That is not glamorous. That is not, that's not like, having coffee with them and donuts on Sunday morning, like that's what we feel good about.
Yeah.
Like that feels good to us. It's comfortable. This is not that. This is getting their contact info and getting a call at 2 a.m. that they are stuck somewhere and need a ride and they messed up in some way and they need help. And you saying, all right, I'm going to do this. Like you might not enjoy that, but that doesn't belittle its impact. And I think that's the only way you do have real impact is if like you're helping people through real problems. It again, yes, it might be through conversation and coffee meetings and whatever, but man, they might be struggling to pay their bills. They might be struggling with addictions. You name it. We're all messy people, right?
If I'd speak on behalf of the typical church, we would love to have more believers in our church. Like, can we go out and rob from other churches? Because then they kind of know how to act and they know how to talk and they give and they've been taught all those things. I think a lot of churches really more typically would like that, but it's different from what you're talking about, like real discipleship of let's start from square one.
Yeah. We want potty trained Christians.
Yeah.
Guess
That was
what?
Josh.
Title.
Guess what?
Let's clarify. That was Josh.
Not everybody's potty trained, folks.
We're actually
And-
that's what we're titling this podcast is Potty Trained Christians.
Potty trained Christian.
yeah. Not everybody knows where to go,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
No, it's a really good point, and I think this is what's really hard for. If we look at the whole model, I mean, if you talk about going beyond the breakwater and people's lives that are really messed up, and we're bringing them back into the church, I think the church can only handle so many of those. The typical church, like, and then maybe we shouldn't go out for a walk because we want to really pour into these people, maybe, or unfortunately, I think sometimes churches quietly say, maybe there's a better church for you down the road, and maybe we're not it. I think that's the really hard part about this podcast. I think it's a hard part about what we're doing. It's going to mess up your church a lot.
Yeah.
Do we really want that?
Yeah. I'm very contrarian and cynical. So I wanted to say it's going to mess up your church, air quotes, because like, is a church if you're not, doing the mission and things like that? Maybe it's okay that it messes up your church. Maybe it needs to be messed up a little bit. Because again, if you're doing it and nothing is happening as a result, is it a church or is it a club? Is it a group of believers, which again is fine. But if you're going to say you're a church, well, that comes with a charge, right? That comes with a responsibility. And you got to do it. And it's hard. It's not easy. But yeah, it is going to mess things up if you decide we're going to do this thing. So expect it,
Yeah.
It's going to happen. It's not easy.
I think that's a great place to end.
Oh, it's a phenomenal place to end, and I think it's probably the biggest challenge that churches are going to face today. And I think there's a reality check. What is God really calling us to do as a church? Is it to be that club for believers? That, quote, sort of has a mission, maybe, to go share the gospel, but nothing more? Or is it really the charge to go make disciples, and that means it's going to get really rough and really messy and hard, really hard?
Ed, if you could speak to the believer on a Sunday morning, say they're listening to this and whatever upcoming Sunday morning that they are going to be entering into, how would you encourage them to make a shift in their Sunday morning routine?
Well, I think the first thing is look around and see what's currently being done and ask yourself the question, who are we here for? Are we here just for the believer, those who are a lot like us, or is the church really here for somebody that is different than us? And what can we do to make every person feel welcome? Because I really think it starts there. I think if we go real practical, and it's not the greeters at the door that we're talking about who's like, oh, I signed up to be a greeter. I mean, somebody who really is like on the lookout for whoever comes in the door, that no matter how they look, no matter how they act, that they walk in and it's like they walked into heaven. And you're just like, I could not be more happy that you're here today. And I think that really matters. And that's a really simple, concrete thing that believers can do who understand, make disciples, be on the lookout for everybody who walks in the door, because God will bring them when we're starting to really be open to that.
Yeah. That's great. Josh?
That's great.
Yeah, I knew it. I was going to say, thanks, Josh, for being on the podcast. You want to end it?
That's great. If you haven't noticed, Lyndsay always ends with, that's great.
Okay, also, I've
Sorry.
never started a podcast by saying, alrighty.
Oh, what?
You
I
always
started
No, I
a
always
lot of
say,
them that
what?
way.
always start with,
You start.
all right.
What?
And then you start. Yes.
I thought I say, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the
but you
Breakwater.
start, all right. Welcome back. You always do it.
Oh, my.
You always do it. It's fine.
Show me the receipts.
Watch
We
the
all have blind
episodes.
spots.
Some more than others.
Lyndsay's are just huge.
All right, Josh.
What?
Is that it? That's how you're ending
This
it?
is your show. I'm just a guest.
All right. Thanks
Okay,
for
Lyndsay.
listening, guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. you can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.